Welcome to the Saints and Alumni Show right here on WBCR 88.3 The Saint. I'm your host this week, Brandon Murphy, class of 2017, with special guest, field producer for ABC News, Christopher Donato, class of 2013, approaching his 10-year reunion at Siena. We have a great lineup today. We're going to talk about his Siena experience and now his current work at ABC News as a field producer. Chris, thanks so much for being on the show today. I don't want to give away too much in the second segment, but how is your day going? How's your week been? How are things?
It's been a busy week. Started off at home, ended up in South Carolina, drove all around South Carolina, and Tuesday night had a great flight home. We're delayed from weather, and then there was no AC on the flight. So it's been a busy week and a crazy week.
Well, you mentioned that you ended up in South Carolina, but before we get to present day, we got to put the clocks back a little bit, back in 2010. And we want to know about how you ended up at Siena. Grew up in, I believe, Westchester. So how is somebody from downstate? How did you find out about Siena? Did you have a sibling there at the time? Did your parents come to Siena? What was that college process like? And ultimately, why did you choose to become a Siena Saint?
So Siena had always been on my radar. I have cousins who are older than me, and they all had taken a look at it. My best friend growing up, his family actually moved when we were growing up to right around the corner from Siena. So it had always been on my radar. I kind of ended up at Siena a little bit by accident, kind of process of elimination. I almost ended up at flight school. And then one day kind of woke up and said, yeah, I don't want to do that. I either want to be a high school history teacher or a pediatrician, which I know they're so similar. Started the whole process over again, which my parents were thrilled at having to. I knew where I was going to apply. I knew where I wanted to go. So they were so thrilled when I said, yeah, I don't want to do that, and had to start the whole process over again. So I think my brother had a soccer tournament or something up near Albany. So we knew we were going up. So we said, all right, we know about Siena. Let's just go take a look at it. And I wanted a really big school in the middle of a city. And by process of elimination, it was a couple days before the May 1st deposit deadline. It was between Siena and another really large school in the middle of a city. And I was sitting at that school in a large auditorium, and they said, okay, this is the classroom you'll have, whatever, your intro to whatever class. And I just kind of looked around and said, yeah, I'm not going to a big school in the middle of a city. I don't want to be with 300, 400, 500 other people in one class. All right, Siena it is. And the next day I got home. I got home from work. I was working after school at the time, and my dad came downstairs and he goes, pick now. I go, all right, Siena. He goes, make that deposit right now. I'm like, all right, well, it's 10:30 at night. Can I just do it in the morning? Do it now. I'm like, okay, done. And that's how I ended up here.
So then you get to Siena, and you mentioned, that smaller school fear was a little bit better of a fit for you. I remember, for me, I grew up in a town and I graduated with 77 kids. I get to the dining hall, and there's more people in the dining hall than there is in my town. It's pretty crazy. Westchester, a little different, but you get to campus, your freshman year. What do you remember about your first year, your first semester moving in? Where did you live? Kind of what was that adjustment process like for you?
I mean, I just remember it just being just a community from the beginning, just from that first tour of we hold doors for each other, where, that doesn't really happen, especially in New York City. Um, to you pull up and all the stuff is taken out of your car and is in your dorm room before you even get to your dorm room as a freshman. And that's just kind of, I don't know, it was just like this whole crazy experience. I remember before, during orientation, when they had us meet with our advisors, my advisor was Dr. Mahar, and she goes, well, you're from near New York City, so this place isn't normal. This isn't the real world. Everyone's always happy here. Everything's always great here. This isn't the real world. But enjoy it while you're here for the next 4 years.
And so, you had some great experiences. You enjoyed a lot of your time at Siena. And there's three kind of key experiences I want to touch upon with you in the first segment today. And one of those being the junior year, two experiences that year, and the first being studying abroad in Cape Town, South Africa. My biggest regret was actually not going abroad, and everybody I talked to had a great experience. So I'm curious about why you wanted to study abroad and what your experience was like over there.
So that was also part of my college search process. I knew I wanted to go somewhere, and I wanted to go somewhere different. I felt like a lot of people pick Europe, and I just feel like there's always the chance in life to go to Europe. It's a relatively short flight from New York. So I wanted somewhere different. And I remember again, I applied to all these different schools, and one by one place at the time, you could only go abroad to Ireland. I said, yeah, I don't want that. So cross that school off the list. And I remember going to the study abroad office and they said, so where do you want to go? I said, I'm thinking South Africa, but I'm open to anywhere. I don't really want to do Europe. I want somewhere different, kind of off the beaten path. And Brother Brian tried convincing me to do a year abroad, doing a semester in Buenos Aires in Argentina and South America, and then doing a semester in Cape Town. But I didn't want to be away that long, so I said, "All right, South Africa's always kind of been an interesting place on my list. I'll do it." And that's how I ended up there. I fell in love with South Africa. I've been back visiting friends in South Africa several times ever since, and we still talk every couple days.
One of the
Almost
great
10
experiences
years
that I
or
had,
10 years later.
yeah, 10 years later, which is crazy. And you didn't want to be out of Siena for a full year, you said. And did you study abroad in the fall or in the spring semester?
I did the spring, which was great because I left in January, which is our winter, their summer.
Yeah.
So I came back just as it was turning into winter there. So I was back in the summer here, which was the best ever. It was almost a year of summer.
Yeah, a year of 65 and 75 degrees would be an ideal summer for everybody. And that fall semester though too, I believe you were an RA and you were an RA in the building that you lived in freshman year. So what was that building and what was that like to be involved within that kind of community at Siena?
Yeah, so I started in Ryan Hall as a freshman, and then junior year I was back in Ryan Hall as an RA, and it was just great. Like, I don't know, like seeing the freshmen come in, they're babies, they don't know anything. Some of them more independent than others, and some of them can figure things out a little more so than others. And then just seeing that progression over that semester of transitioning from like a child where you have a set routine every day in high school to now being a young adult and having to figure everything out on your own and navigate it. It's just it was fun to watch.
And you talked about the traveling, staying involved as a community, and that's beginning to paint the picture a little bit about what you do nowadays. And I want to kind of shift gears to the academic side as well at Siena so we can understand your role better in the second segment at ABC News. So what did you come into Siena as for a major? What did you study? What were some of those favorite classes that you had and maybe professors?
So I walked in not knowing if I wanted to be a high school history teacher or a pediatrician. I came in as an American Studies education major, and I quickly realized, yeah, I was not going to do med school. I did not want to do that. So I said, high school history teacher it is. And then that Christmas break, freshman year, my friends and I went to New York City as tourists for the day. We end up at Good Morning America, and I just had that aha moment of, you've always loved TV, you've always loved the news. My parents would have to turn it off on me to get me to do my homework growing up. So I said, this is it. This is what I want. So I went back to Siena, took the intro to education class, and part of that was you had to do some sort of classroom experience. So I was sitting inside a sixth grade classroom, and I said, "Yeah, I definitely don't want to be a teacher. This isn't going to happen." Sophomore year, went back, took the intro to broadcast journalism class, and said, "Yeah, this is it," and I've been doing it ever since.
And you take that broadcast journalism class. What were some of those classes like? Were you out within the community? Were they in the classroom experiences? Was there a TV studio on campus? Where did you begin some of that basic knowledge at Siena?
So what was great was because Siena's a small school and the program is small, I was able to, starting in that intro class, you're touching the equipment, you're learning how radio works, you're learning how the TV equipment works. There's a TV studio on campus. You're learning how to write for a newspaper. You're learning all the trades and how to do everything. So at the end of my junior year, I knew I wanted to have an internship down in New York City. No, I'm sorry. At the end of my sophomore year, I knew I wanted to have an internship down in New York City. And when I was applying for internships, they kept telling me, oh, this or that. I ended up at NBC News that summer. And they put all the intern applicants in this one big room, and one by one, they would call people in to do interviews. And they were all talking about what elite journalism schools they go to, but none of them could touch the equipment until maybe their senior year, or some of them not until grad school, because their programs were so big and they didn't have enough equipment. And I remember I was interviewing at one station in New York City, and the news director was giving me a tour of the building, and he's like, "Oh, this is our editing room. We use a program here called Final Cut Pro." I go, "Yeah, I use that in school every single day." And he just kind of looked at me like I was crazy. We start walking again. He goes, "By the end of your internship, I want you to do what's called a stand-up." I go, "Yeah, I do that in school every day." And he just kind of looked at me like I was crazy. We end up back in his office. You know, by the end of your senior year, I want you to have what's called a resume tape. It's going to be a disc with all the work you've done. I opened up a folder and said, "Here you go. I have one. I do this every day." And he just looked at me like I was crazy. He goes, "Well, you know what? Here's the paperwork. You can start any day you want." I'm like, "Thank you." But I ended up at NBC News that summer, where they told us on during orientation day that you had a better chance of getting into Harvard than getting an internship there. I think they said like 10,000 people applied. I don't remember the exact number, but it was a huge number for a small amount of spots.
And that's what's so great about Siena is, they have the Center for Undergraduate Research and Creative Activity, the sciences, the business, the communications, all of that hands-on experience. And we got about 2 minutes left until we got to cut to break. So I want to touch upon the other experience that you had your senior year, commuting down to Manhattan for an internship with ABC News now at this point, and how that kind of helped build your foundation with them. Can you talk about that internship?
So I started off as an intern right when I got back from South Africa at the end of my junior year. Um, they, I was in the weather department at ABC News. They said Ginger Z needed a lot of help on the weekends. At that time, social media was still relatively new, so a lot of the producers didn't know how to work social media. So she would have to go online, look for all the weather elements on social media for her own pieces. She was doing Good Morning America and World News Tonight. So I would be there during the day to help find the elements for her piece, so she could start writing her piece for World News. Um, and she and I were just a really good team, and we worked really well together. So at the end of that summer, I actually had a job offer from one of the departments, but I just couldn't make it work commuting down from Siena. So I stayed on as a weekend intern at World News at the time with David Muir. Class ended at 11:30, I think, on Fridays, and I was on a 12 o'clock train down to the city, in the office by 3, and then I was there all day Saturday, all day Sunday, and then a 9 p.m. train back up Sunday night after work.
Well, that's
And
a
then
pretty
I did that the entire year. And then at the end of that year, well, during that Christmas break, Ginger called me saying, "Hey, I'm taking over during the weekdays. I know you can graduate early. Do it and come join my team." I said, "Would love to. I have a great semester planned ahead. How can we do it where I can fill in?" So I filled in as an anchor, a freelance anchor producer, and a World News weekend intern. And then when I graduated 2 weeks later, I started full time.
And that's a lot of hinting. It's almost like you're in this business and on podcasts all the time. You keep the listeners engaged and hinting at what's coming next. So after break, we're going to talk about what that hectic schedule may look like now, your path at ABC, and some advice that you would give to the listeners today. We'll be right back here on the Saints and Alumni Show. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Saints and Alumni Show right here on WBCO 88.3 The Saint. I'm your host this week, Brandon Murphy, class of 2017 from the Alumni Engagement Office, with special guest this week, field producer at ABC News, Christopher Donato, class of 2013, and approaching his 10-year reunion. We just wrapped up talking about Chris's Siena experience, and we kind of hinted at the internship that he had senior year into ABC News, and we want to touch upon that experience now in the second segment. So to begin, Chris, you said you graduated, and a few weeks later you started at ABC News. What was your first job with them at ABC News, and what was kind of your day-to-day responsibilities within that role that you had?
So I started off as what's called a digital news associate at ABC. Some places call it a desk assistant. For the assignment desk, I was answering the phones, making calls, just dealing with all the stuff that would come up at the assignment desk, whether it was booking travel for correspondence, running to breaking news, or producers going for breaking news, to, hey, there's this great story about whatever, make calls and write an article about it. I did that for about 9 months, and then they asked me to help co-run the 2016 election coverage. So I did that. I'm still exhausted from it all these years later. And then after that, during the week, I was a breaking news field producer, and on the weekends, I ran either the evening or overnight assignment desk. Then fast forward to 2019, I was on the full campaign trail full time, initially covering Joe Biden's campaign for the first few months. Then that summer, every weekend, there was some big event where every single candidate attended. So I would do either work with a correspondent or I would do the overarching storyline. And then I moved to New Hampshire to cover the ground game for the 4 months ahead of the New Hampshire primary. And then after that, was home for 12 hours, South Carolina for 24 hours, Nevada for 15 days with a day trip to Salt Lake City sprinkled in to go chase Michael Bloomberg around. South Carolina for 5 days, North Carolina for 5 days, Massachusetts for 24 hours, home for 3 days, Michigan for 3 days, Ohio for 24 hours, and then the world shut down. And then I got sent on to be one of the main producers covering COVID in the US.
And you talked a lot about, your last, 5 to 8 years, and I'm really interested to kind of break down some of this campaign talk, because I know that's also what you're on the road doing right now. So during that 2016 and 2020 election, on the campaign trail, Sienna was actually fortunate enough to send students to New Hampshire for that primary, and they had a really cool and really unique experience. So can you talk a little bit about what a day is like on a campaign trail and what happened when you bumped into those Sienna students?
So it kind of depends if you're following a specific candidate or if you're doing a state. So for the candidate perspective, you're basically a professional stalker. You know everything about that candidate. You know what their voting record has been, what they've done. Or in Donald Trump's case, he had no voting record because he wasn't a politician beforehand. But you have to know if they've written books, you have to know their books inside and out. You have to know where they're going. You hear their same speech all day, every day at every single stop they go to. So you have their speech committed to memory. So you have to listen to it, because if they make the slightest tweak, you'll notice it. The general public will have no idea, but you'll notice it. And then you have to start figuring out, why do they make that slight tweak? What's going on? So you're the expert. If one of the anchors of GMA wakes up at 5 a.m. and is reading the New York Times or a local newspaper or wherever the candidate's campaigning, and they say, this person said this or that at the event last night, you may get a call from the anchor asking, hey, I'm reading this, what happened, explain it to me, how did it go over with the crowd? So you have to be the complete expert, know everything. Now, on the other hand, if you have a state, so like when I moved to New Hampshire, I was no longer just covering Joe Biden, I was covering all the candidates. You have to know all the candidate speeches, know everything going on, and just kind of see the shifting that's happening. Oh, wait, they're bringing more resources in. Wait, now all of a sudden, these Joe Biden events are more crowded than they've been a few weeks ago. Are people more enthused for him? And then you go into the crowd and talk. There was one that he had a huge crowd, and we went into the crowd and started talking to them. And a lot of them were campaign volunteers who were bussed in to help the ground game there. So you just have to know all the candidates, all their staffs, and just keep an eye on what's going on. You're the eyes and ears for your news division. You're the expert for that state or for that candidate, depending on what you're doing.
It's really interesting. It's not reading the room, it's reading the entire state and kind of getting a feel of what's going to happen next. And one of those was running into those that Sienna group. So what was that like? Did you only see them for a few minutes? Were you spending a day with them? Was that planned, unplanned? What was that like in New Hampshire?
Yeah, it was. I'm forgetting where it was, but it wasn't too far from Manchester, New Hampshire. It was in a high school cafeteria, I remember, for a Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard event. She was running for president at the time. And, the four of us, me, the CBS embed, the Fox embed, and the embed from NBC, the four of us were in the back of the room setting up. It's routine. It's what we do. We get there really early. We watch the crowd as they're coming in. And you're also keeping an eye on, what does the crowd look like? Are they younger? Are they older? Are they diverse? Are they more men? Are they more women? Are they military? Or who's coming to these? Because it all creates a great picture of how the candidate's doing. And then I started seeing younger people come in. I'm like, this is interesting. And then I saw a couple people wearing Sienna shirts. I'm like, oh, this is really interesting. And then one, I think, was your brother. And he was telling me about the whole program and how they've been going around to different candidate events and listening. And I think maybe even volunteering for some of the candidates to really get that inside perspective. And that was really interesting to see. And then, they saw us at work because the Congresswoman took questions from the media. She came to the back of the room, came to her cameras, and they get to watch us do our part of the business instead of just being in the back of the room watching the candidate.
And I already know that that's probably your fondest memory over the last 10 years was running into Sienna people. But other than that, was there one trip that you were on, one story that you covered that resonates with you still, or maybe something that was your favorite part about whatever position you were in at the time?
There were a couple stories. One was, sorry, it's never a dull moment. One was Hurricane Dorian. It was the first hurricane I'd ever been to. It ended up being the strongest one to ever make landfall, and we were there. It was a direct hit for us. I crossed a lot of boxes off on that one. First hurricane, first eye of the storm, first Cat 5, first helicopter ride because we got airlifted out of there a few days later. So that was a crazy story. Another one was one of the first ones I did. I went to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. This girl, I think she was 9 years old, was so good at basketball that colleges were already recruiting her. And a lot of times, it's parents pushing them, but
Yeah.
her father did not care. He goes, no, let her enjoy it. She's a kid. One day she's going to wake up and say, I hate basketball. So let her have fun while she's doing it. And we surprised her with the Harlem Globetrotters. In the middle of the segment, they jumped into the high school gym. We were using a high school gym for that. It was the gym she would play at after school. So they surprised her, and then they even gave her tickets because they were going to be performing in Pittsburgh a couple months later. So they gave her tickets and to be backstage, not backstage, but backcourt with the team before and after the game.
And a lot of great memories through the years, and we're live on air, and you just got a phone call. You're always on the clock. So people might be wondering what you do now at ABC News and what a typical day is like, and who is part of your team.
So there is no typical day at all in news, no matter what your job is. Right now, I'm a breaking news field producer and also dabbling a little bit in covering 2024. So just this past week, we were in South Carolina covering Governor Ron DeSantis's campaign there. And next week, we're going to Iowa because there's a big dinner where all the Republican candidates are attending. But other than that, I do breaking news. So whether it's on July 4th, I got a call at 3 a.m. Hey, there was a mass shooting overnight in Philly. Start driving down there. Or last week, there was a lot of flooding all across the Northeast. So I was up at 2:30 a.m. trying to figure out how we can get into some of the hardest hit towns and go live from there for Good Morning America. There are days I may just be sitting on the couch with the dog and then all of a sudden get a call of run to the airport right now because of this or that. So I always like to say I never know when I'm going to sleep, where I'm going to sleep, or if I'm going to sleep. And a lot of people think, oh, you guys are the news, you fly private. No, we very much fly commercial, but for us, it's a little harder because we have to fly around show times. So we know we're going to be live at 7 a.m. and again at 6:30 in the evening. So we have to figure out, are there flights in between those to get us from point A to point B? And then we also face the same weather delays or mechanical delays that everyone else faces. So we know when there are crazy delays, we know what it's like too.
And we got just about 2 minutes left in today's show. And I kind of want to conclude today's episode talking about how Siena prepared you for the job that you have now. And for anybody that's listening or anybody that goes to the Siena website and reads your story as a gold standard recipient a couple of years back, some advice that you would give to them. So to conclude today's show, how did Siena help you, and what is some advice you'd give to listeners?
So the very first story I ever traveled for on ABC was to go to Charleston for the church shooting. And I remember the day or two after the shooting, I'm standing in a big crowd right outside the church. There's a big memorial going on. I'm talking to people. And I remember interviewing people about what happened, and I sent the video back. And I remember the person in New York who was cutting that piece and putting it together sent me an email saying, that was a really good job. You really listened to those people and empathized with them, and were really able, because you actually listened to them, you were able to get really good responses out of them. And, some people will just show up to things and just have their list of questions, read them and go. But I remember everything at Siena was always about, learn empathy for others and put yourself in their shoes. And, you just got sent to a city that just got hit by a mass shooting, a racial mass shooting too. And it really turned everything upside down. And it was just really great to see how the community came together and really, really said how they stood up to hate. And just getting those emotional interviews and talking to the people there, that's really something that Siena prepared me well for.
And some last advice, some words of advice. So somebody that wants to get into the field, you got to be adaptable. You got to adjust on the fly. Some advice that you would give to somebody.
It's definitely not a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 job. One of the correspondents always said her advice was everyone in this industry has two jobs, the one they want to have that they're doing on the side, and the one that they currently have. And the one you want to have, maybe she started off as a producer, but she always wanted to be on air. So she would be there doing her producing everything. And then afterwards, after the shows, she would go shoot stuff for herself. So that way she could get that experience and get those reps and everything in. And that way one day they knew, okay, you're ready, you can do on air. The best advice I also got was from Ginger Z, which was every couple months, every few weeks, when you have to change your passwords, set a goal and make that goal your password. So when she first started, her first on-air job was at the NBC affiliate in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And she set the goal of being on the Today Show in 10 years. So her password at the time was Today Show 10. And that way you're constantly typing it in, constantly reminding yourself. And it worked. She was on the Today Show within 10 years. When I was her intern, she was dating her now husband, and her password was Mary Ben. And there was one day I was at Siena and she texted me a picture of her hand with a ring on it. She goes, well, the password worked. So you're constantly reminding yourself, and you're constantly forcing yourself to set a new goal every couple months. And for her, it's worked. So I think for others, it would too.
Awesome. Well, Chris, I think I'm going to go set my new password for something for the next 6 months. And by end of 2023, we'll have some other success stories to share. Congratulations on all that you have accomplished in the last 10 years at ABC News. Thank you for taking the time today. And maybe we'll see you back for a reunion in June. Everyone, thanks for listening today. We'll see you next time right here on the Saints and Alumni Show. Have a great weekend.